So the future glory breaks into the present, gives us an insight into the past. And so we are at the point of the story at the beginning. At the beginning. And the beginning is not the beginning. The beginning is just the beginning of the revelation. And the beginning of the revelation started with a man. It started with a man. And at the end of last week's teaching, I said, go and have a look at the man. We spoke about eternity, how everything that we've ever known and ever will know is a piece of eternity. That is, if God could have taken eternity, taken a pin, pricked it, and a little bit of glory shone through, then everything we've ever known is equal to that little bit of light that has broken through from eternity. And it has lit up the time frame of this age. Okay, in this age, the first revelation given to us of this age came through the prophet Moses. So tonight we came to the beginning, and the beginning of the Bible starts with Moses. All right, it's very important to note the beginning of the Bible starts with Moses. So a lot of people think it starts with Genesis. Well, it can't start with Genesis because Genesis came from Moses.
Yeah.
So it has to start with Moses. Because Moses takes us on a journey backwards through the book of Genesis. As the Lord revealed to him when he asked him to let him see his glory, he said, I will cover you in the cleft of the rock. Let my goodness pass you by, and I'll give you a glimpse of the train. Yes. The back part of me, the behind of me, the rear of me. In other words, the history of me. The history of me. And so, let's have a look at this man Moses. Firstly, Moses was an Egyptian man of Hebrew descent. So an Egyptian man of Hebrew descent. So from the time that he was born, there was a decree passed to kill all the boys. And then to save this boy, because the Jews were growing in such numbers, and the anti-Semitism of it was that they wanted to stop them from becoming too big. And by the way, that story has never stopped. That's an ongoing story. This very day, anti-Semitism is at its highest peak since the Second World War. Okay, there are more countries passing laws and putting things in place to make it more difficult to live as a Jew in this world. Presently, there are about 12 million Jews on the planet, in comparison to more than 7 billion people. Very small part of the world's population. Yet, the world is so threatened by this small group of people. And it was no different in the time of Moses. So there was this time where the Jews were living in slavery. Moses needs to tell them the story, but Moses can't tell them the story because Moses wasn't in a different part of the story. Moses wasn't raised as a Jew. And he tells the story of how he was born in one of his books. And his name, Moshe, spelled in Hebrew, literally means to be drawn out of the water. Everything in the Hebrew scripture, everything, has a revelation of the story. And so you need to understand something. Firstly, Moses was schooled in hieroglyphics. So Moses spoke Egyptian, right? And he wrote hieroglyphics. Probably because he was born into a royal family or adopted into a royal family. Because of that, he was taught not only hieroglyphics but possibly also cuneiform. And so the languages of the Rosetta Stone historically became very important to the understanding and unraveling of world history because it had 3 languages on it. Moses most likely wrote at least 2 of those languages, cuneiform and hieroglyphics. So that's how he wrote. So in that type of writing, pictures told the story of what you wanted to say. And the pictures put into different sequences kind of told you a story. And so that was how his mind worked. But he did not speak Hebrew, even though his mother raised him. So, because when kings are born, the queen needs to get her groove back. So, she will not actually take care of her child. Other women who had children in the household would actually, the child would be fed by them. So the Lord orchestrated for his biological mother to become the handmaid that would raise him. So he suckled at his own biological mother, who was raising him as somebody else's child. Alright? And he was raised with his other brothers in the courts of Pharaoh and raised as a prince, who would one day become a great warrior in the army of Egypt. And so you see how Moses became this man who had battle strategy taught to him as a young man, because he would be raised to one day be in line to be Pharaoh. So because he was a prince of Egypt, because he was raised as a prince of Egypt, he spoke the language of the royals, whereas the slaves spoke Hebrew. And so when God called him to lead God's people, he says, I stutter when I speak their language. And God said, I've raised a brother. He speaks the language. You chill. He will speak to the people. You will speak to Pharaoh. I'm calling you to be my spokesperson to Pharaoh. I've orchestrated it that you would speak his language. And you would know his mind because you were raised with him. You are his brother after all. So the Pharaoh that Moses had access to was his brother by adoption. So understanding adoption laws, even though he was not biologically of the same mother, they were brothers by the same father. Right? So when his mother took him in as her son, it was more likely because she was unable to bear a son to Pharaoh, which would have meant she would have been sent to one of the outskirts harems on the river Nile, where she would then live out her life because she was unable to produce a son, because the wives of Pharaoh must produce sons to Pharaoh. Even the daughters of Pharaoh had to produce sons for the lineage. And so one of Pharaoh's daughters becomes his adopted mother, and one of her handmaids, his mother, raises him, and he is raised as a prince. Now I've gone to great lengths to paint a picture of how this Egyptian man actually had Hebrew roots, raised by a Hebrew mother. Now I think his mother may have told him some stories about the history of the Hebrews, but she would have to be very careful how she did that. But his sister was also one of the handmaidens who helped his mother in the courts of Pharaoh. So his biological sister Miriam was raised with him in the same courts, working as a maid. She saw him grow up, and so there was this positioning. God positioned Moses in a place where he could be used in his destiny. And I think it's very important to know, sometimes you find yourself living in the wrong family.
Yeah.
And the wrong people. And they don't get you. They speak a different language. They speak a different language. Is that he was raised in the wrong family with the wrong people, speaking the wrong language. Been raised as a prince and disconnected from his people. All part of God's plan. All part of God's plan. And the irony is that he got to live. He got to live because he wasn't raised as a Hebrew. Now slaves didn't get to wash every day. Slaves didn't always eat well every day. Slaves got beaten when they didn't meet their targets. And then instead of making shorter targets the next day, they increased their targets. So that the people of God were enslaving. They were living in what we would call today refugee camps. And when the one thing you know about the refugee camp is you smell it way before you see it. Because there's no infrastructure for toilets. When you go to refugee camps today, the infrastructure for toilets is not there. So you will smell the camp way before you see the camp. And when you see the camp, you'll feel the pain of the people, even in the smell of the air. And it literally is two worlds colliding. Because Moses would have been raised in a culture where he got to shower, bathe, and have other people dry off. Moses probably never ever dressed himself. Because princes don't do that. They don't tie their own sandals. They have slaves to do that. And when you're raised in a royal culture like that, you are used to having other people serve. And you don't talk to them in a respectable way because they're slaves. And so Moses was raised like that. He was raised to be a slave master, a slave driver. And for 40 years, he was prepared in the courts of Pharaoh. So I hope I've painted a nice picture of Moses for you. This Egyptian man, who then, one day, walking in the desert, gets called and his attention is drawn to a bush that's burning. And he realizes that this is not just any kind of bush burning. Something different about this bush. So he goes to the bush, it's burning, but it's not. It's not being consumed. And it's not like just any other bush, it's burning, and then when he comes closer, he hears a voice speaking from the bush to him. And he has an encounter with Elohim. He has an encounter with Elohim. And Elohim calls him out of the fire. Now, I said the first letter of Moses is M. Maya, which means water, drawn out of the water. The second part of Moshe is Shem. Shem is fire. Drawn out of the water and called through the fire. That's what his name means. He was called into a purpose for which he was drawn out. And the Lord drew him out of one thing and called him into another. And it was going to be a journey of water and fire. If that makes any sense to you. And it was in his name. It was in his name. The first revelation of the thing is this, that God calls a man and brings a revelation to him. But the revelation that is coming to him is going to connect him with the revelation that was given to his forefathers. That was supposed to be died and killed and destroyed. Now remember, when a nation conquers another nation and they want to overcome them and take over the nation, the first thing that they do is destroy their history. They destroy their history. They completely annihilate any history of their existence. That is why today in Cape Town, there is no history of the Khoisan people. Because when we became a colony of England and a colony of the Dutch and the Dutch East India Company, they destroyed the history. The only remnants of the history of the people of Cape Town is now found in the captain's reports of the ships that landed here. And so we're finding more and more history of our people going back before the time we were colonized. And Egypt was a colonizing nation. And they were an enslaving nation. And they were a warring nation. And Moses was trained to be a leader in the army. That is why when we come to the part of when we go through the Exodus, we will see that the formation that Moses took the people of God into when they went through the wilderness was a battle formation. Because he was trained in the art of war. And Moses understood that God was calling him. He understands his call and he thinks, I am the commander in Pharaoh's army. I am a man trained in warfare. I'm a man trained in battle. And he goes and he throws his weight around, his authority around. And he says to the man, don't treat that man that way. He kills the man. Because, in killing him, he was like saying, what authority do you have? And then he realizes what he's done. And the Lord takes him from there and calls him out of that for another 40 years of new training. And goes into the wilderness for another 40 years of training where he learns to be a shepherd.